Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Further Comments. Now, this episode, we have a special guest, Catherine Bamford. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me. As I said earlier, I'm slightly nervous, but we'll see how this goes.
No reason to be
Well,
nervous.
you are,
You are brilliant and one of the best people to talk about the subject.
well, Catherine, you are known as the Duchess of Document Automation among certain circles. And by certain circles, I mean, I just made that up. But I think that title is deserved.
I appreciate that. Sometimes you just get these titles by being the person that's been around so long doing this particular kind of thing. But yes, when it comes to doc auto, that's definitely more my specialist subject, if you like.
The fact you've been around for a long time and survived is an indication that you know your stuff.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I've been lucky that word of mouth in the legal tech world is key. And I always have applied that thing as you're only as good as your last project. So, you can do 100 good projects, but if your last one was rubbish and your client goes to an event and mentions it to a few people, that's going to spread like wildfire. So I've been lucky that clients hopefully have been happy with how I've helped them over the years and referred me to others. And the other great thing about the legal tech market is everyone knows everyone and everyone moves around. So you work for someone at one law firm and then they move to another law firm. And if they were happy, they bring you along too.
And the same problems persist across different law firms and different clients as well. Like, I think there's a sort of adoption cycle that everyone goes through, which starts with get a document management system in place, organize your data, then look for the next efficiencies and so on. This kind of like step by step is necessary across pretty much every law firm in the market.
And everyone always starts by saying, I know everyone else is doing this, but could you come and help us? And it's like, you're in the same boat. You're all, some people are maybe further along with one particular aspect, but you're doing something else over here. And you can go faster because you've waited and you can learn from everyone else's mistakes. But yeah, it's so common that everyone starts with, I know everyone else has done this. And people are almost embarrassed to admit that they still need to look into automating their documents.
The more one gets to know an area, the less confident one is in that area. And that's something that Socrates said, the more I know, the more I realize I don't know. And that's kind of the opposite of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where if you know a little bit about a thing, then you actually assume that you know more about the thing than you actually do. But then once you delve into it, then you, of course, realize you know less, therefore you have less confidence. So maybe, Catherine, could you talk about how it affects you personally? Because I certainly have had that experience as well, personally, and also with the lawyers that you work with.
Yeah, of course. Well, yeah, personally, definitely my fraud complex has grown over the years. I think when I first, I've maybe been dabbling with Contract Express for 6 months and I would extol the virtues to everyone. And I was so confident that it was the way and the only way in the process that I had done it in my particular firm was the right way to do it. More and more these days, I've realized that there's many different ways to approach the same problem. There's many different tools out there, and no longer is Doc Auto the one and only answer to how to draft documents. There's lots of cool things happening these days around drafting. I find when I work with lawyers to automate documents, the more of a subject matter expert that they are, the longer it takes because they think of all those nuances of what could happen in the drafting.
And how do you catalog those nuances?
A variety of ways. So I could be working with a partner who hates technology. And if I said to him, put something into Excel, literally, or she would be like, not a chance. And I'd be waiting 6 months. So some people, it's like a workshop. We sit side by side and we go through. And I try on a first cut to apply a kind of like 70-30, 80-20. As you know, lawyers love to think about that one time that a zebra's crossing the road eating an avocado rather than the 99% of the time that it's either option A or option B. So I try and just really like scale it back to that. But then I've got, others that are happy to use kind of like family tree diagrams. I've got others that prefer to like mark up comments and options and square brackets in the traditional sense. So it's how will be fastest with the particular audience. I make it pain-free
That's right. And pain free is the big thing. Lawyers like things dead simple. And the favorite words out of most lawyers' mouths are "it depends." And so, really, what you've described is kind of cataloging all of the "it depends." And that's what I've done with Sally over the last 4 years. Every time a lawyer said, "Well, it depends," I say, "On what?" And then whatever comes out of that lawyer's mouth, I add to Sally. So that's what created the 18,000 tags that we have right now, is to say, "It depends on what," and then add that
Yeah.
to Sally. And now it's a list of things that you can put into document automation and be able to put into filter and be able to put into a large language model. So I assume that you've collected a bunch of "it depends" over the years. So tell me more about the various "it depends," whether it's a contract lawyer or a different kind of lawyer.
Subject matter type would be the easiest way to break it down. So you go to one law firm and they want to automate a loan document. Everyone wants to do it bespoke. Their document, their firm precedent, which is still the gold standard of how to draft, is to have your own agreed precedent template. I think we have that crossover UK, US as to how we refer to things, but that's still the gold standard, is to have a firm template. But the questions that are asked to complete the square brackets within a template are the same, because that's the information that you need to know and collect from the client to be able to complete the document. It doesn't matter if the wording of the contract's different, the factual information is the same. Dependent on software, we keep what we refer to as like dictionaries of all of those questions, so we can help people with a starter for 10.
How long has that
So that's
dictionary become?
I'm not as organized as you. I think every time I've met you, I've said, I'd love to talk about this because I have this, but have I curated it or collected it? So it's more, if I have someone that needs to do a new employment contract, you know, also when I work with a client, obviously that's their IP if it's within their
Mhm.
thing. But these days, like, you can type into ChatGPT, what are the 10 key pieces of information you need to draft a lease for a UK landlord granting a lease to a tenant in a shopping center? And it'll give you them. And they're your
yeah.
questions and your tags and your options.
And
It's like,
that's a really good point. On their IP, there's a real question as to whether even any of that is protectable. Because
mm,
who owns force majeure? Who owns merger agreement? Who owns a merger agreement in China, right? These are all public domain things. And as a copyright lawyer, none of these things is copyrightable. These are all facts
mhm,
in the world.
mhm.
And even if you have a collection of those things, there's an argument that that collection is similarly uncopyrightable. So yes, kind of. I, as a lawyer, think, well, gosh, all of these taxonomical items, all of these, it depends, are my secret sauce. But I've talked to literally hundreds of law firms in my context of Sally. Everyone's collecting the same things. There is really no secret sauce.
I completely agree. In terms of the information and the questions, there's no secret sauce. For me, there's a slight thing about if I'm consulting to a client and I go to one law firm and I work with their top banking partners to come up with the questions for the LMA loan agreement. And then I go to the next law firm and I go, I've got theirs. Do you want to just see theirs? That's fair. It's like they gave me those questions. So yeah, there's definitely some sort of conflict there, I think, or
Yeah.
just ethics.
And there is ethics. And in copyright, there's a concept of the idea expression dichotomy, where the ideas are uncopyrightable, facts are uncopyrightable. Only expression of those ideas and the expression of those facts is
Okay.
copyrightable. So you can imagine the questions that the lawyers have asked, that particular expression of the question, totally copyrightable. But you can imagine putting that into a large language model and say, extract the ideas, the uncopyrightable ideas, extract the uncopyrightable facts from those questions, and then collect those in a list. Then it goes from copyrightable expression to uncopyrightable ideas and uncopyrightable facts. So there is
That's why I was so looking forward to today, because I just wanted to listen to you two. That was even lead in. These days, there's very few documents, legal documents, that I would come across. This information is not available if you look for it already. What are the questions to be asked? So one of my top tips nowadays for when you say to law firms, why do you think your document automation efforts have stalled? And a lot
Mm.
of it is it takes so long to get the markups from the lawyers for our engineers to automate them. One of the key things I says, well, have you tried to give them a starter for 10? So go, we understand you want to do a loan agreement, a lease, an employment contract. Take these questions and use these questions to mark up the document, and just that list, that kind of checklist for them. They can then edit them if they want, add other options, can just speed things up immensely.
I think that's right. When you think about everything that exists in the world, you often have those questions that you just talked about. And when we think about everything that we do in the law, it's applying your client's facts to what exists in the world, the law, the statutes, the regulations, the particular business decisions that I need to do. These are all things, facts in the world that you need to collect. And so, yeah, so I think that all these things already exist in the law and in business considerations. And you've done the hard yards of being able to collect those things that exist in the world and be able to collect them and help automating. So that kudos to you and everyone doing this good work.
Why more software companies don't take advantage of it and also offer it to their clients? Some of the generative AI tools coming out, they have like pre-baked questions that you might ask if you were doing a contract review of a commercial contract. But the document automation tools don't have, here's an example questionnaire for a lease, an employment contract, a loan agreement, a corporate SPA, even though they must have that information and it's been done 1,000 times. And if they did do it, then to get more into your world, Damien, what we've talked about before is then all the tags could be the same. And then we get into more interesting things about all the variable names and how we push stuff and pull stuff across.
It's a really interesting question to talk about. Why do vendors not ship with these kind of pre-filled questions? And I think like some vendors, LexisNexis and Thomson Reuters, for example, they've got all the content out there already. So why don't they ship with questions? I think partly maybe it's because they want to charge extra for it.
Yeah, I think when I've
Um,
asked the question before, some of them have had a service function that would do it for them. Thomson Reuters did at one point when they changed the practical law precedents to be run with
mm,
Contract Express in the background. They did say that
mm,
you could take the dictionary from those and then apply it to your own. So that was sort of going there. I think when it's someone that big, Lexis, Thomson Reuters, I think a lot of the problem is the departments just don't speak to each other. And maybe like the actual
mm.
client and the product and the real understanding people don't speak to each other to come up with these kind of things, or it's just not a priority. With the smaller vendors, I think it's just that either time or missing a trick. But there are some that have one in the UK called Claralis, who are doing
Yes.
pretty well in the States, I think, actually. They have got a playbook for a corporate SPA. And when I say playbook, I mean more like a dictionary of questions. They are a software that you don't do it yourself. They do it for you. That's what's different about them.
As we think about collecting these variables, it used to be that you needed a massive company like the ones you've just described to be able to say, well, they are the keepers of knowledge. And then based on that keepers of knowledge status, they are able to then be able to say, here are all the variables from our corpus of that knowledge. And so as part of that, I worked with a lawyer that was apparently, if you were in New York City and you wanted to have a lease agreement for one of the skyscrapers in there, he was the person to go to because he had all the, do you want 2 bathrooms on one floor or 1 bathroom on the floor? And did you want sprinklers on every floor or not, right? These are all variables that really varied with the lease agreements. And so if you wanted to have that knowledge, you had to go with that person. And that person actually created software based on that particular use case. So that was a big barrier to entry in the old days. But you can imagine today just asking that of a large language model. What if I have a lease agreement for Manhattan real estate? What are the variables that might be considered? Here are some examples. Bathrooms, number of sprinklers. Give me $100. Give me $1,000. And now that list is not stuck in that lawyer's mind, but is something that anybody could be able to do. Any lawyer would be able to do, and any software developer, legal tech company would be able to do. So the
Exactly.
barrier to entry is now dropped
Oh.
precipitously.
Yeah.
I'm going to pull you up there, Damien. I don't know if that's necessarily true because if you said to GPT now, give me 100 issues to talk about in this merger agreement or in this SPA, it's going to come up with 100 issues. Are they actually important? Are they actually things that lawyers would want to discuss and consider to be real issues? I think that still requires a domain expert. So to your comment, I think AI is going to be really good to get you across the blank page problem, but it's not going to give you something that's going to be like top tier law firm, not even mid tier law firm, not even, I don't think it's even like qualified lawyer ready, right? Like it's going to be just not a blank page, but you can then take scalpel or the sledgehammer to it to make it better.
I'm going to
I'm somewhere in the
strenuously
middle of
agree.
both of you. I'm somewhere in the middle of both of you because when it comes to corporate SPA, roughly about 200-page document, regardless of the jurisdiction you're in, you've got, I think it's about 600, 700 sets of square brackets. About the first 10 questions will eliminate 70 to 80% of those square brackets. So it's
Yes.
more, they should ask, what are the 10 issues? And then for each issue, what are the 5 nuances or the 5 options for each issue? If they ask those questions, then they'd probably get really quite good answers.
And I'm going to strenuously agree with both of you. I was saying, give me 100 of these concepts. And Horace said, no, 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 no. You need the expertise to say which of those 100 are actually good. And Catherine said, yes, you need to be able to have that subject matter expertise. I would say yes and yes and yes. The human cognition has three aspects that are related to this. Number one is ideation. Number two is curation. And number three is expansion upon this. The first one, ideation, is really hard for us. The blank page problem is a really big deal. Ideation is hard. Curation of that, way easier for cognition. If we get the 100, I can strike, yes, no, yes, yes, no, yes, yes, no. We humans are able to do that, especially if we're experts in the field. So curation, easy. Expansion from that curation saying, oh gosh, yes, yes, yes. And there's also another thing. Oh, and here's the other thing. And now that I've had this list, I could be able to expand upon this much more easily. So I would say I strenuously agree with both of you. Yes, get the ideation from the first step, and then let the experts curate and expand beyond that initial step. And I would argue for legal tech companies, all you need is the number one, because then let the user do number two and number three. Let the user curate, let the user expand. And so it doesn't have to give you out of the box the perfect. It just has to give you out of the box a list from which the user can expand and curate.
There's a UX challenge there. The UX challenge is if it presents the list as here's something that could be a starting point, that I think is possible for lawyers. But if it presents the list as here's a definitive list of issues, I think that's where, from a UX perspective and also from a legal liability perspective, it falls down. So the design question that these companies have to contend with is not an easy one because it's highly nuanced and situational.
It makes me think about when I first started automating 10, 12 years ago, whenever it was. We started with real estate documents because I was a real estate lawyer at the time. And there was a clause that had at the end two possible options of wording in square brackets. I can't remember now what it was, but I know that when it came to automate it, when I was practicing, I just always struck out the final one. I don't know why. It just felt like the other one was right. Probably not a very good lawyer, just admitting to that. But when it came to automating, I asked the person that sat beside me, and then I went and asked the PSL, and then I went and asked someone else. And it turned out no one really knew, and they always struck out the second one and just kept the
Really?
first one. You're right that if you're given options, you think that they must be relevant somehow. And then
Mhm.
you do have that danger of overcooking something that really isn't relevant. Document automation is great for that. And something people don't use it for enough is after you've launched it to the lawyers to use, going back and checking. So if you've gone, is liability A, B, C, or other? If everyone always says B, 100% of the time, get rid of the question and the options. If everyone's always putting other, well, what are they putting? You actually need different wording, that kind of thing. So it can be really valuable in terms of continuous improvement to look at that data.
When I was a lawyer, I had an associate friend who said every time I would draft this document for partner A, he would say, do it this way. And then partner B would say, do it the diametrically opposed way. But one could imagine that one could catalog the particular proclivities of partner A and the particular proclivities of partner B, and then have the document automation say, well, are you drafting for partner A or partner B? And then if partner A, then this way. If partner B, then this way. There's a way to symbolically code those kind of personal proclivities.
There
That kind
is.
of
I would say that's a waste of time. The reason that things take so long is actually that problem with people giving instructions haven't ever kind of thought about if then else logic before, and the people coding don't have the authority or don't feel they have authority to question the instructions they're getting. And hopefully somewhere that I can help when I help with projects is to challenge sometimes the design of things as they come through. The worst thing you want is drafting by committee where you send an email
Mm.
around and you get everyone to kind of comment on it. That's awful. So generally I do things like timed voting. If you have an opinion, feed it back by tomorrow or hold your peace and never speak again. I think Electra Epona, she came up with kind of a good way of doing it when she came up with the one NDA. It was that kind of like,
Mhm.
which do you prefer of these options? But it was agreed to the purpose of what the clause was trying to say as to the stylistic wording, and then we'll worry about the style later. And again, that's somewhere that I think ChatGPT and other LLMs can help greatly with improving and simplifying wording, even if it's just from an ideation point of view. Give me another way of saying this that's less legalese.
All of this that we're discussing reminds me very much of a conversation I had with Alex Hamilton a couple of months ago, where he was a huge proponent of you just need a playbook. And this playbook can be applied in the drafting stage, in the first draft stage, it can be applied in the negotiating revision stage, because you can always refer back to that to say, how do you want the outcomes to be? What's the preferred position? What are the fallbacks? And I guess my question to you, Catherine, is do people actually do that where they come up with a playbook and then they use that to inform the document automation, or are they just seen as separate processes?
Seen as separate processes, and unfortunately, playbooks are still not focused on anywhere near as much as they should or could be within law firms. They are more considered within in-house teams, but law
Mm,
firms, still at the very beginning, coming more into the forefront now with new tools that are coming through. But yeah, such an underutilized tool is the playbook, in my opinion. One thing that document automation that we've built previously before new tools were available was kind of a second round. There was a client who were updating their terms and conditions for all of their suppliers. It was because they were making them simpler and getting this diamond quality kite mark for plain English or something. They knew that if they sent that to all of their suppliers, people would push back and they suddenly would be inundated with red lines and having to renegotiate all of their existing contracts. So I went through with the senior commercial lawyer and said, well, if they push back on this clause, what would they likely say? And it's okay, they might change 30 days to 60 days or 30 days to 90 days. And what would you tell a junior paralegal if they came to you with that? And we just documented all of that. So we created a questionnaire where a paralegal could say, what if they push back on? And they would choose insurance, liability, whatever it may be. And then it would come back with, we would only accept, reject this. So we automated that kind of playbook functionality so they could go through it on screen and then get a reply to the other side and a red line out. But nowadays you can do this instantly and it's accept, reject, edit. The good tools that I'm seeing are the ones that do, and it was Peter Duffy actually that drew me to this. The good tools are the ones that you can click on, it brings you straight away to where it's been changed and what should change. And you can edit it with it on screen. Any that just come up with a list or a table, that's not enough because it's still
yeah.
a cumbersome process to go through and find and adapt.
I love this digression that you've just done. Playbooks are something that when I first left the practice of law in 2015 and started working for Thomson Reuters, a big component of any lawyer's work is playbooks. We want to be able to seek out lawyers that have playbooks, because if they have a playbook, they've actually thought systematically about the particular area of law and the particular legal services that they're providing. And if they have that systematic thinking, then you could be able to automate that systematic thinking. So the fact that one has a playbook is a good signal that maybe this is a firm that is doing it right. So that's thing number one.
How
Thing number
many did you find? That
very,
there's
very
so
few.
few.
Very
Mhm.
few in 2015, and I would say probably more today than in 2015. 10 years later, there's more people are thinking about this automation, but still precious few. I think that every lawyer thinks that that lawyer is a beautiful snowflake that can't possibly automate all of the very complexities that happen inside of my brain. But then once you ask, it depends on what, and then write down the what's, and then you say what else, and what else, and what else. And once you exhaust that, they realize, oh gosh, here's all the things that was the beautiful snowflake in my mind that now right here in paper, it seems less complex. And the
Mhm.
answer is it probably is less complex, but we just won't tell you that. Most of the people with the playbooks are contract lawyers, transactional
Mhm.
lawyers, to be able to say,
Mhm.
yes,
Yes.
this is the deal, this is the way we do this kind of deal in this jurisdiction for this area of law for this industry, right? And this, so these are the types of playbooks that contract and transactional lawyers have. I see playbooks almost never in litigation, and now I'm just going to say what I just said is untrue, because there are playbooks for employment law. There are playbooks for bankruptcy law. There are playbooks for personal injury law. Personal injury lawyers know to a T exactly the questions they're going to ask and exactly what gets the dollars up to the point. Plaintiffs' lawyers say this is how the dollars go up, this is how the dollars go down. So litigators, that is personal injury lawyers, bankruptcy lawyers, employment lawyers, these types of lawyers have playbooks, but they just don't call them playbooks. All right. So I guess a question for both Horace and Catherine is that as you think about the head and the long tail, that is the head of the most common things and the long tail of the less common things. Employment, bankruptcy, personal injury, these are the head of very common things. But I wonder with large language models, I'm interested in your thoughts on, can large language models have us be able to explore the long tail to create playbooks for trade secrets, for copyright infringement, for breach of contract? Can one be able to create a playbook for this long tail and use large language models to help that playbook for those less common things?
I have two ideas on this, and then I'll hand over to Catherine. The first is do you even want to do that for the long tail? And I'll expand on that in a second. And the second point is, I used to volunteer at a community legal center, and it did kind of all sorts of stuff, right? Criminal law, renters disputes, etc. Even though they didn't have a playbook, there was always this kind of understanding of, oh, well, if it's this dispute or if it's this situation, then here are the steps you follow. So in every kind of field, I think there is a sort of logical sequence of steps. And it's interesting that we've been calling this role inside of legal the legal engineer, because I think it's more like a process or logic engineer. And I think, like, yes, you can absolutely map the human brain, map the understanding and expertise to a sequence of steps and conditions, etc. But now to my first point, do you even want to? And there's kind of two layers to that. First is, do you want a language model to do that for you when really the task is the translation of a human understanding into a written process? Because a language model may not necessarily have that within its parametric memory. And second is, if it happens so irregularly on the long tail, is it worth the effort? There was a once upon a time, I helped out this Australian law firm with automating their shareholders agreement. And it took several weeks of work automating all the variables, etc. And after I've done it, I said, well, here it is, based on all the feedback you've gotten. What do you think? The partner who was at the firm was like, oh, that's great. Yeah, we don't have one of these deals until the next quarter. So we'll look at it then. I'm like, how many of these deals do you have a year? He's like, 5. Sorry, what? You got me to spend weeks automating this for it to happen 5 times a year?
Yeah.
So
I've been there and I understand. I've felt that pain. When you have a deal that only happens once a month, and corporate transactions are the example, it is worthwhile automating if it's something that takes 6 to 10 hours and they've got to do it really quickly overnight. And actually, it just takes away a lot of that grunt work when they've a lot of other stuff to do up front. When I first started out, the naivety, if you like, of what I had, because I'd been doing real estate work, I used to say to everyone, this is going to save you hours, which at, £200 per lawyer per hour is going to save you this. And I remember head of knowledge at Latham and Watkins saying to me, Catherine, when we charge £40,000 for the average deal, saving 2 hours doesn't make a big difference, So that was a lesson learned of, like, there's different benefits to different things in different areas of law. But yeah, I've felt that pain as well, where, it's normally like the person that's the senior sponsor of the document automation project happens to be the partner that does those particular type of deals. And that's the document that you have to do first. And you realize that's not worthwhile. So on the long tail, people ask for the most and the highest volume work comes through. On the playbook point, and you touched on process, when I refer to playbooks, what I mean by that is not the steps to be taken on any sort of litigation or transaction. When I talk about playbooks, I am referring to when you're the party that's receiving the first draft rather than preparing the first draft. What do you accept? What do you reject? What do you change? How do you negotiate based on your client's position or your firm's preferred position on particular clauses? So it's helping that negotiation round of things. That's more what I suggest as playbooks. On the process point, and you said shouldn't be a legal engineer, more process engineer, I completely agree. And I think that's something that has been forgotten, and why we've reached such a plateau using traditional and existing tools, and why we're not seeing better use of technology that's freely available and the firms already have and are paying for. And I think it's because everyone's focusing on the tech and we've forgotten about the process. Like, you'll maybe remember 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago, we were all banging on about, we need to get some lean and Six Sigma experts within law firms. That's kind of been forgotten. Like, no one talks about that anymore. And those process maps, people are building platforms now without mapping the as is and the to be, and they're just building it straight away based on what people are saying without going through those tried and tested principles of how to do things. So it's maybe just not cool anymore. And these teams have grown exponentially, where, before we were saying you need to put resource in because the lawyers don't have time to build things or to work with the knowledge experts to do this. I need to put my hands up and say I perhaps created this problem as well. And now these law firms have teams of legal engineers, but it means that we now have this disconnect with the subject matter experts and the knowledge lawyers. It's become a feed through the instructions. Someone just builds those without challenging. And there's not that sort of, let's design it together properly first and look at what we're going to change and measure and why. I think that's a real problem at the moment that we need to somehow address, but everyone's excited with Gen AI and running off on that. So we're not going to get a process mapper back in.
I think that you touched on something, two things really important that I'd like to talk about. I think number one is that the most recent thing you said was that, you just accept what the lawyer says and put that into the system without challenge. And I think to challenge that lawyer is very difficult, especially if the process person is a junior person, which they usually are. Every lawyer you talk to in their minds is the smartest person in the room. So if you have that kind of dynamic and a lower level person, of course, that lower level person is not going to challenge the senior rainmaker who has brought in millions of pounds or millions of dollars, right? So of course, I'm just going to put it in the system without asking questions. So I think one of the problems is the disparity between the rainmaker partner and the junior process person. So that's thing number one. Thing number two, you talked about Latham and saying, listen, for 40,000 pounds in 2 hours, that's really not anything. Last night, I was at a conference put on by Cloud Court, who are really smart people. One of the patent experts on the panel, we were having dinner last night, and she said, we have a budget of X number of dollars. It occurred to me that that budget is effectively a flat fee. Because the client's not going to pay more than the budget. And almost always, of course, the lawyer reaches up to the budget. Horace kind of goes to our last one talking about pricing. So she said, okay, so it almost always goes to the budget. And the patent drafter almost always blows past that budget. We have pride of ownership and pride of authorship, where I, as a patent drafter, want to make the patent as good as it can be. Therefore, I will blow by the budget and just eat the excess on top of the budget. So that is, to a law firm, lost money. So I guess the question for Catherine and Horace is, I wonder if, yes, 40,000 pounds or $40,000 for the entire deal, but the excess that goes above that, can document automation essentially be able to say, well, now I'm going to meet the budget without having to do the excess through the document automation. So it's not going to save 40K, but it's going to maybe save the 5 hours that would have otherwise gone past the budget. What do you think of such things?
Yeah, 100%. When people talk about the billable hour, in my experience, I don't work with many law firms or lawyers these days that just run the clock and then charge the client what's on the clock. As you say, they give them a price at the beginning of the project. Now, that might not be the same price for every type of transaction of that type for that year, like you may do with commercial leases. That's true fixed fee, but it's still giving a fixed fee for that particular deal. So a lot of how do we work more efficiently, tools and processes, is about reducing write-off, because as you say, that figure is not actually really ever real anyway, because you go way over it and then it gets written off. So it's how do we reduce write-off? That 2 hours, of course, that is saving time. I think his particular point on that one was more, that's not the way to sell it, Catherine, to these lawyers, because 2 hours isn't the big deal. It's more on that particular one, it's you'll be able to do this on the bus on the way into the office at 4 in the morning. It was kind of more like pick your benefits that you're selling that day type thing. But absolutely, you are so right, Damien, that people that are talking about, tools and do we want to do it more efficiently when it comes to the billable hour and that kind of thing, we're actually giving fixed fees every time we do a deal. There's very few areas, litigation somewhat, but there's very few areas these days and jurisdictions where the clock's just allowed to run. So it's all about reducing write-off and improving profitability.
Except in New York and America, right? Like they just keep the clock running.
I don't know, like even with kind of corporate clients in the States, I don't know.
If clients have unlimited money, of course, just let the clock
Yeah.
run. For services rendered, I'll give you a quarterly bill for services
One
rendered.
area that I get very angry about is insolvency and restructuring, because they do have an expression of bill it till you kill it. And I hate that. I think that's so unfair
Wow.
when you have creditors that are owed money and employees that are owed back pay and things like that. I'm not saying that all restructuring lawyers feel that way, but yeah, I just think they definitely are one that are not really interested in automation when you really get to the top partners. The juniors are going, we should automate this. We're putting the same information into this full receivership pack hundreds of times. Why aren't we doing this more quickly? And then the juniors get you in. Someone's heard of you or worked with you or something before. When you get to the senior partners or the receivers themselves, that always goes quiet.
Bill it till you kill it is something I've not heard before, but I'm now going to be able to store that in my back pocket. Charlie Munger, I think, was the one who said, "You show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome." And
Exactly.
so, really, the incentives for that kind of "bill it till you kill it" kind of mentality. Of course, there's no disincentive to be able to do that. And then, similarly, some of the best paid lawyers are M&A lawyers, where the fees are
Mm.
baked into the deal. So, really, there's a huge amount of fees because you're not charging for hours spent, you're just charging for value. And the value of these massive deals is so huge that there's, of course, I'm going to make a ton of money. And I think any litigators that see the kind of billables that come from M&A are like, my God, I'm in the wrong business because these deal lawyers are making way more money than I am. And I think about the
What?
percentage of spend in the United States and worldwide on contracts and deals versus litigation. Contracts dwarfs litigation and other things.
I
You don't think so?
I would express the opposite.
Oh,
I
tell
would
me.
express the opposite. The number of times I've seen litigators charge for one court case, 10 million bucks for a court case over 3 years. An M&A lawyer would look at this and go, "You can get 10 million bucks over 3 years? My deal runs for 3 months and I get a few $100,000." And so it's a totally different mentality from when I look at these kind of bills that come in over time, the sheer amount. But I think one of the points that Catherine made, which I thought was really clever, was you have different personas inside of the law firm, inside of your customer who want or not want this technology. These incentives are often in conflict. So, Catherine, we briefly spoke about the plateau to adoption when we last chatted one on one. And you talked about it earlier on this podcast as well. I wonder if that's also a factor in the plateau that you see. Like, there'll be people that resist and go, nope, no more thanks. We don't want any more adoption.
Less so in recent times. Partners and rainmakers want to have answers when their client asks what they're doing with technology, and they want to have ways to differentiate themselves from the competition. I think generally these days, plateau has come from this disconnect between the subject matter experts, the knowledge lawyers, and the lawyers, the legal engineers, legal process people, legal technologists, whatever you want to call them, kind of over here, and then IT here as well. Recently, a law firm had a 9-month backlog of maintenance for document automation text changes, and they had 16 legal engineers. So, throwing another legal engineer at that, that's not the problem. The problem, I think, has become this process and this disconnect between. And I think that partners in that particular firm, it was a partner that got in touch with me and went, can you come in and help us and see what on earth is going on with our dog auto processes? Because we want our documents updated. We've got a backlog of another 50 documents we want updated, and we're being told we have to wait. So, yeah, I think that it's changed in that we're not having to convince partners these days, and it's, juniors are more techie and partners aren't. I think actually, if anything, the partners are pushing for it. Again, finding subject matter expert time is still a problem. And with document automation, I do think we are at the point where I need to put my hands up and say, again, part of the problem, and perhaps the way I said it should have been done 10 years ago is not the way it should be done now. Tools have got so much better, and people understand more the logic of coming up with the questions and the conditions in a way that was completely brand new before. And I think more subject matter experts should be trusted, and knowledge lawyers should be trusted to get hands on with tools themselves rather than us needing specialist expertise. And the specialist expertise you have, use them as kind of like the masters, the teachers that do the really complex, hard stuff, not the text changes when a regulation changes. There's no point in a subject matter expert like a knowledge lawyer having to update a flat word precedent, as I would refer to it, and then send it to an engineer to do again in an automated document, who then sends it back to be tested. It's silly. They should be trusted to do it. The argument used to always be, well, if you let them do it and they haven't had the doc auto training, they'll break the coding. Really hard to do. And you've got environments where you publish it, you test it. If it doesn't work, you see it instantly that it doesn't work and you adapt it. And these are first drafts anyway. This isn't deal documents that are already got client information in. So I think we need a big push at that. But the problem that I've created, and many of us that have kind of been in this sphere have created, is that if I now suggest that to the legal engineers, it's now rather than the lawyers getting scared of technology because they're going to lose their jobs, is now the legal engineers being like, no, you can't let the lawyers do it because they're now worried about their jobs.
To the point of, I won't use this because I'll lose my job. It is 2025 after all. So, of course, we need to talk about large language models. So, I'm going to ask, we've talked a lot about document automation. We've talked a lot about process automation. So let's add LLMs, say how might
Mhm.
they be able to help or not help with each of those? So the
Yeah.
question for both Horace and Catherine, finish the statement. LLMs can't possibly help with blank, but LLMs might be able to help with blank, both on the document automation and process automation. Finish that sentence. LLMs can't possibly help with, and LLMs might be able to help with.
Wow. Catherine, please, you go
Okay,
ahead.
LLMs can't possibly help with. There's nothing that I would categorically now say because I'm finding arguments to everything. What it can help with when it comes to document automation, there's lots of areas. And I very much see there are some crossovers, but I see it as they complement each other really nicely. So a lot of the process problems we've talked about, getting markups, definitely we can use generative AI to help with getting markups. With some of the automation itself, some of the tools are putting in, this is an example of how we do a span. This is the question. We can do that kind of thing. Testing is a really interesting area. So if you have 100 different variables with several options each, testing every possible connotation is going to be difficult. So how can we run experiments to deal with testing? Then there's things like, it sounds so simple, but anyone that's ever tried to automate a set of board minutes for a company annual reports and that kind of thing, it's actually a real ball ache to make something as simple as board minutes for the simple reason that you've got to ask who the attendees were, who was present, which one of them was the chairperson. If they were the chairperson, they need to be listed down here, but not up here, but they need to be counted in the number that's down here for quorum. What were the documents that were looked at? Can you write them down and then can you define them? Based on the definitions, can you then list those in alphabetical order? Using if then else logic, those things that sound very simple actually is quite tricky to get right. And it's actually a lot more tricky than like automating a corporate SPA where you're like, is it a target group or a single company? Something like that, where you can put in, here's an example of a set of board minutes. Here's our notes from the meeting. Create board minutes for this recent meeting. That's the type of thing that an LLM can do really well. And for the lawyer, the checking is a lot quicker than setting up a document automation questionnaire and answering a document automation questionnaire. So that's an example of where actually an LLM can be used for drafting in a better way. If you have transactional documents like share purchase agreements, leases, employment contracts, where you have a firm gold standard, if then else logic using a tool like document automation is still your way forward. But generative AI can definitely augment the process of getting those. As I said, there's lots of other nuanced areas. I'm getting to a point where I'm trying to put a framework in my head around this. So I'm breaking down drafting into preparing a new document, bespoking and adapting a new document, and then negotiating a document you receive. And then breaking types of documents into transactional, the ones we've just spoken about, litigation, so things like court forms, which are much better to be if then else logic, but then witness statements. Well, witness statements actually LLMs can be very nice on. Then you've got other types of documents. You've got what like advisory. LLMs brilliant at like advice notes, kind of reporting memos. Put this in a way that improve the language in a way that my client will understand. Put a summary at the top. Brilliant for summaries at the top to just make it, rather than them having to read 30 pages. And reporting. So contract reviews and standard due diligence, really actually difficult with traditional automation tools to do reports just because of formats and styling, and creating tables is horrible in Word with if then else logic. And then things like what I'm referring to is the kind of noting or reporting. So things like your board minutes and your articles and that kind of thing. Traditional tools complement, and it's not one should do the other.
I really love that, knowing that we don't have a lot of time left. I have a question to follow up on that. It turns out LLMs are really good at using code. They are able to express code quite well. So one could imagine being able to say, as an input, here's the scenario. Here are the board minutes. I have to be able to say, here's the chair, here are the people, put all the docs in alphabetical order. Just express that in plain language. And then also input the hot docs into the context window, the hot docs syntax. and the contract express syntax or whatever syntax you want, and now say output in hot dot syntax or contract express syntax, all of these rules that I've provided you and put that into the syntax. Turns out the large language models are probably pretty good at doing such things, translating that plain language context into the code. Is that something that you've experimented with or that might be possible?
Totally. And the vendors are experimenting too. And there's pilots and beta groups already out there doing it. Conditions within conditions within conditions, not there yet. Fields and inserting data, absolutely working well. And simple ins or out working well. Not breaking formatting, still something we've got to get over and still tricky, but that's the kind of thing that we're getting.
And not breaking formatting, large language models are also really good at debugging. That is saying, here's code that is breaking, debug it. So one could imagine LLM number one creates the code, LLM number two debugs the code. Have anyone experimented with such things?
I've not seen that. That would be cool. I'd like that anyway. Yeah, I'd like to try that. But then saying that again with what we're talking about here, let's not overcomplicate it. Document automation, it doesn't need someone with extreme coding expertise to do. It's low code technology. And it's more, do you understand why a piece of text needs to go in or out, and then be able to put this nice wrapper around it. I think where we will get to is that document automation will be the engine that we don't see. We'll take notes from our clients, or the clients will send an email, or the agent will send through the heads of terms. Whatever platform, whether we're in Microsoft Teams or wherever we may be, it's then take that, and then the engine and the logic is already there of the if then else that we have in our document automation and our firm's gold standard precedent, if we have one, or if not, from counsel or practical law, a third party precedent or an example we've had before, and then turn it into the output. So I imagine it won't be long till we see that.
And goes to a theme that Horace and I have talked about a lot during this podcast, is the combination between neural net AI and symbolic AI. That symbolic AI is good old-fashioned AI, and document automation has largely been good old-fashioned symbolic AI in a low-code sphere. And as you said, you're perfectly right that yes, the UI kind of disappears, the user interface disappears, and all that's left is just the user experience. And I wonder if large language models are just going to further put the tech into the background. That is, not only could it be low code, no code to be able to create the hot docs thing or the contract express thing, but it is also low code or no code to just express the rules that then gets translated into the symbolic AI, the hot docs note, and then the output to the end user is magical. But it's magical not in a probabilistic sense. That is, the neural nets make things up and they are not deterministic, they are probabilistic. But instead, because it's put that code into symbolic AI, put it into hot docs code or into contract express code, it is deterministic, therefore reliable. So I think you're right. I wonder if the user interface kind of falls away, where I, as a user, just provide natural language inputs to be able to translate to symbolic AI outputs, to be able to translate to document outputs without the user really knowing all of those stages.
So
Very much.
Sam at Office and Dragons had already done that a year ago. And that's partly why they got acquired by Latera. So
Right.
well done, Sam.
Yes, exactly.
But to answer your question earlier, Damien, what can language models not do and what can they do? As you guys were talking, I ran through like 20, 30 different scenarios in my mind, and language models can basically do all of them with sufficient guardrails and engineering. The one thing that I say language models can't do is you cannot use a language model to send out a client-facing document without human checking.
And judge facing.
That's yes. Yes, especially judge facing.
I think that's right. I know that we are coming close to the end of our time. Catherine, this has been a fascinating discussion. I know a few people that can be able to speak more knowledgeably about all these things. So we're really grateful for your time. Any closing thoughts on where we've been and where we're headed and what you're excited about going forward?
I think I'm definitely, to come right back to the beginning, I feel at the moment that my fraud complex is really high at the moment. And, sometimes like getting asked to come on a podcast like this is almost like, you're like, I'm going for a job interview and what are they going to ask me? And do I know any answers? And thank you for making it so comfortable. But I think it's because generative AI and LLMs, I'm in the same place as 99% of other people out there in terms of we're just figuring it out. And I'm figuring it out from my particular area of expertise, which is document automation. How does it affect that? And my opinion changes almost weekly from a conversation I had where I was like, well, no, you couldn't use it for drafting transactional documents. oh, but hang on, actually, no, the way I've seen you do that now for the board minute, that's quicker for the lawyer. So maybe that would be
Mhm.
better. And is it, so just constantly evolving. So where we're going, I'm hugely excited with where we're going. I'm looking forward to in 2025, we've got some clients that are now looking to experiment at integrating their document automation tools with the generative AI tools that they've bought and seeing what we can do with those. And I think hopefully where we're going is that idea of somehow the instructions come in and we get a draft out, but we're not having to see what happens on the stages along the way.
That's great. And to bring us back full circle, I think that your fraud complex and imposter syndrome is greatly under needed, I guess is a way to say it. Socrates, he said that this man thinks he knows something. I know that I know nothing. Therefore, I am wiser than the man who thinks he knows something, right? So I would
Oh,
say in that scenario,
I like that.
Catherine, are Socrates. You know many, many things. Therefore, you know that you don't know, but your wisdom exceeds that of most people. So, Catherine, thanks so much for really sharing your wisdom and sharing your expertise. This is great fun. Let's have you on again.
I've loved it.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks everybody for listening. Please, like and subscribe, as the kids say. But I would say that if you've enjoyed this conversation with Catherine, please pass it along to other people. Horace and I would talk even if there weren't anyone listening. But if people listen, that's actually more fun. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.